So I struggle really with anorexia and a severe exercise addiction. A person's true self is a big key to noticing that there is some disordered patterns going on, right? People didn't care what I looked like. People didn't actually care how strong I was. It was just we were there to be in community with each other. So I'm like pizza is a passion. That's when I started to really, become vulnerable to body image stuff and what people think. And I just think to be a little bit older now and to be an example to younger girls and to younger women just became really, really important to me. I had to burn a certain number of calories. I had to work out for a certain number of hours. It didn't matter how tired or how sore I was. I was like there at 5 o'clock every morning, and like it got pretty extreme, and like none of my clothes fit. We couldn't go on dates because I would refuse to eat at restaurants. And so it was like completely taking over even fun parts of our relationship. Oftentimes it feels like there is no end to it. There's not an end of like, if I weigh this much or if I look this way, that's the end. I am passionate about coaching is so that marriage partners don't have to be that person for one another, because it's extremely damaging. Yeah, in those early times, I would just encourage people, if you start to notice disordered thoughts or just feeling really scared about how things are going, like reach out before it becomes, years. The earlier you deal with these things, I think the easier it becomes to get out of them too.
Welcome back, Wellness Ninjas, to another episode of the Wellness Dojo Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Craig, and today I'm really excited. We've got the owner of Nourished and Free Coaching. She is an experienced eating disorder coach. Excited to welcome to the show, Jilisa Chenard. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. I usually get like Jilisa or some variation of that. So that was very good.
Perfect. I'm pumped that I got it right then.
We're off to a good start.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you. Really important subject that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm really excited to dive into that. But, just off the cuff, like we actually don't know each other that well. We've talked a little bit. So I thought I'd play a little game to maybe like try and get to know you just a little bit more. Are you down with that?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to play just this or that and keep it super light. But since we are going to be talking a little bit about food and exercise today, I figured that's the route that we'll go with. So,
Yes.
you ready to dive in for this or that?
I'm an expert at choosing food and exercise, so this is good.
Okay, good. Good. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. So, okay, first one, just going super classic here. Pizza or ice cream, this or that?
Pizza. Before you even like said it, I was like, the answer is pizza. I'm like pizza is a passion. I kind of like, if you follow my Instagram at all, I would say like maybe weekly posts about pizza. It's actually like a huge part of even like, I would say my recovery is like in eating disorders, often people have like fear foods. And pizza was a part of that. And now it's like every week my husband and I have pizza night. I make the dough, I make it real special. Yeah. So that's a long answer to your this or that, but the answer is pizza.
Oh, I love it. And I'm with you on that one. And yeah, we could probably talk for quite a while on pizza. Maybe we'll get into that in a little bit.
That sounds
Okay, the
great.
next one, I'm gonna go a little bit more kind of towards the nutritious route. So apples or bananas?
Probably apples.
Apples. Any
With some
explanation
peanut
on that
butter.
one? Peanut butter.
Because I can put peanut butter on them. I don't mind a good banana, but it has to be like green still, like slightly green. I don't like them when they start to get mushy. If you put them in bread, banana bread, specifically made by my mom, then it's a game changer. But if we're just choosing a fruit, I would say apples.
Right. Right.
Yep.
I like it. I like a good peanut butter and banana sandwich, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
So
it's a good option as well.
yeah. Okay, next one, chips or candy?
Candy.
Candy.
Yep. I have a sweet tooth.
Yeah, see, I'm a chip guy. The chips are the one where
Okay.
I'm like, I gotta put the bag away, otherwise I just like have a hard time slowing down.
Yeah, no, I've never been a chip gal besides when I was pregnant. That was the only time I like specifically went to the store to buy chips. And I think that's the only time in my life I've ever done that. And so yeah, not necessarily a chip gal.
And do you just a kind of follow-up question on that, like, is there a favorite candy?
Um, yes. Um, but now I'm drawing a blank of what it's called. Oh, like, oh no, that's not it. I don't know, Bulk Barn. I guess it depends on the day, but like I think not all sorts. Those are like the old ones with like licorice flavored, not
Mm.
those ones, but um
I
it'll
think
come
I
to
know
me.
which ones you're thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like bright and colorful and then they have like white on the inside. It's kind of like a licorice, but not really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know which ones you're talking about, but I can't think of the name either. That's okay.
It'll come to me. It's because I'm on
Yeah,
the
it'll
spot. I
come.
can't think of
We'll
it.
be in the
Yeah.
middle of a really deep deep thought and you'll be like, here it is.
Fun sorts, right? Is that it?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
this
come
sounds right.
back.
Yeah, sure.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, I got one last one for you. Getting away from food a little bit. Let's dip into exercise.
Mm,
Squats or
yeah.
deadlifts?
Oh, squats.
Squats.
100%. Yeah. I can squats any day. Deadlifting is like my worst, least favorite thing to do. So,
Okay. So
yep.
squats all day long.
Squats it is. Yeah.
Squats are super functional, right? Like that's something you need
Exactly.
for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. I mean, you could probably argue the same for deadlifts,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'll just go with squats.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks for playing along. Now I
Hmm.
know you a little bit better, and I'm excited to get into this conversation. So, before we really get into eating disorders, that type of thing, can you just tell me
Hmm.
a little bit about like, what you do as an eating disorder coach? Like, what is it that
Yeah,
an eating disorder coach does?
for sure. Yeah, this is a really, I would say it's a newer kind of a practice. I think coaching in general has kind of exploded over the last few years, which can be a really great thing. Maybe in some areas, not so great of a thing, depending on what your coach, what their background is. Coaching is can be such a wishy-washy kind of a word because anyone can essentially call themselves a coach. So eating disorder coaching. So I'm a nurse by trade. I'm a registered nurse. I have a background. I've worked mostly med surg for my career. Um, and with that, gives me a little bit, obviously more of an understanding of the human body and that part of it. And then during COVID, I took the opportunity to take some further education. So I took a course through the Carolyn Costin Institute, which is a coaching course, specifically for people who have recovered from an eating disorder themselves. So it's a very unique kind of a course and a very unique thing that we get to do essentially. So what that looks like as a coach, it's what you would probably imagine any other coach would do, right? So if there's something you want to improve at, something you want to get better at, something that you really need a lot of support through, you hire a coach generally. So I consider myself kind of the go-between in a person's recovery journey between their psychologist, their dietitian, maybe even their family doctor, if their family doctor is involved. So what that looks like is the day-to-day stuff. So most people won't have a dietitian or a psychologist who checks in on them every day. It's often a once a month kind of a program that they will be a part of, or if they're even an inpatient, like that's a whole different kind of a story. So my role essentially is I will work alongside the psychologist, dietitian, whoever is involved in the care, and I help the client with the day to day. So that means we are likely texting most days. I'm checking in, saying like we're setting goals, saying, hey, your dietitian wants you to eat this, and I'm here to walk through that with you each day. So it's really helpful because in anyone who has suffered with an eating disorder, it's a daily battle. It's not a, hey, I'm going to come check in with you once a month and hope for the best. It's every day. you're making the decision to eat or not to eat, or to binge and purge or not to binge and purge, or exercise. So I'm that person they go to on the daily basis of, hey, this is how I'm feeling today. This is what I ate today. This is my plan for today. These are our goals for today. Or, hey, I struggled today. Can you help me? Or what can we do? Or I'm that person checking in of like, this is the goal we set for today. Now let's follow through with that. And now as a coach, I also have my own kind of programming that I like to help clients with. We meet once a week virtually or in person. We work through homework. I give them tasks and we do that kind of thing. It's not my job to diagnose. It's not my job to say why you got your eating disorder or those sorts of things. I leave that up to the other professionals. But yeah, so my role is the day-to-day stuff, essentially. That's what coaching looks like.
That's really a lot of accountability when I think of coaching, right?
Yeah,
Like you
exactly.
said,
Yeah.
yeah. It's that day-to-day check in, that day-to-day support, and sometimes that day-to-day push to just be like, hey, you got this. Let's keep going on what we're, that reminder, like you said.
Yeah. Well, and a big part of too, like a lot of with eating disorder, kind of behaviors, a lot of it has to do with like a person's inner voices, right? Of like, so everybody has a healthy voice and an unhealthy voice, or an eating disorder voice. And that voice can be really strong some days. So my job is to help someone navigate like, hey, but what's your healthy voice telling you to do? Or what's your healthy self telling you to do right now? Can we quiet that other voice? Can we tell them to go away? Can we tell them we're not interested? Those kinds of things. And it is, yeah, big time accountability. Like I also do other nutrition coaching. My husband and I own a gym, so I do physical coaching as well. And it's all the same, right? Like people come to have a coach because they want to be told what to do. They want accountability. They want to be celebrated for their accomplishments. They want help knowing what to do. Obviously, they are searching and seeking help. So, depending on what area of coaching you're looking for, the basis of it is the same. You just want help. And so that's kind of my role in whatever that person needs.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. It's uh, anybody who's kind of reaching out for a coach or even a psychologist or anything like that, the unique thing is that they're at a stage where they recognize that they need support and
Yeah.
they're going to seek that support. I
Mm-hmm.
imagine with an eating disorder, there's signs of, you have to recognize that there is a disorder here, that there is a problem here. What
Yep.
might be some of the things that people would recognize in themselves that they might go, yeah, maybe I do have some kind of disordered eating here and need to seek some guidance.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So oftentimes there's a spectrum, right? And a lot of times what we see is it starts in a healthy pattern and becomes unhealthy, right? It can be starting from, wanting to get healthy, and it just kind of progresses to beyond health. But a lot of things that I would recognize is like constantly thinking about food, constantly thinking about calories, or constantly thinking about how you're going to burn off those calories, being afraid of food, avoiding social gatherings or avoiding certain things so that you don't have to eat certain foods. Obviously, the physical sense comes into it too. Now, not all eating disorders will end up with people being underweight, but that can be a part of it. So a person's physical appearance, if they're severely underweight, that's something that is a very obvious marker. And mind you, like everybody kind of has a different set point or what's healthy for them, but that's a part of it as well. Oftentimes too, we find with eating disorders, there's a lot of other mental health issues like feeling really anxious or depression. Those sorts of things can come into it too. We also notice like the social pressures, right? Right now, obviously, a huge piece of eating disorders and how they become like so much more prevalent is social media. So, an obsession with social media, an obsession with looking a certain way, and manipulating your body or your lifestyle in order to achieve that. So, I think just a loss of a person's true self is a big key to noticing that there is some disordered patterns going on, right? So it can, again, start healthy and just completely go past that point of health, or it can also be triggered by trauma or certain stress event or those sorts of things. So depending on what a person's history is, those are the main things that we would look for and notice in a person who probably is erring on the side of disorder.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you said something that is really powerful is like a person's true self,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a tricky thing for people to navigate because we're all plagued with this question of like, who am I? And like,
Yeah.
what's my
Yeah.
purpose? And like all these things.
Totally.
And it's really easy to get lost in that. And I imagine that when you're putting, and I kind of know this from my own experience as well, but when you're adding exercise and nutrition and a type of image that you're looking to achieve, whether that's, for whatever reason, whether that's for professional reasons, for personal reasons, whatever, it can be very murky when you're trying to decide like, well, who am I versus like who I'm trying to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's murky waters, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think like a person might not recognize that in themselves right away, but it will be the people around you that are kind of like, "Ooh, you're not yourself anymore. This is different." And you might think I'm just basing this off of my own experience, but I thought that I was playing it cool and that I could do life normal and still like hold this disordered piece of me to myself, but it becomes too hard to hide after a while and people notice. And for me it was like when I'm healthy, I'm like joyful, energetic, I want to adventure, I want to do fun things. When I was really sick, that person was gone completely. I was a shell of a human being, and that is obviously not my true self. That's completely the opposite of who I am and who I'm meant to be. And so I think that, yeah, when it starts to take over and becomes overwhelming or becomes just this thing that has taken hold of your life, you feel like you're not in control anymore and you don't have that ability to be your true self anymore.
Yeah. I imagine you've had time to reflect back. I know you share
Mm-hmm.
pretty openly about your
Yep.
experiences
Mm-hmm.
with eating disorder, and I imagine you've had time to sit back and reflect on that time, on like how it started, how it,
Oh, yeah.
how it built to where it was, and then how you came out of it. I wonder if we could maybe go into that journey a little bit, starting with like how did it start? How did like do you recognize how it started to, I don't want to say unravel, but just how it
Mm-hmm.
built to a point where you realized, oh, this is a problem now, and I need to fix this.
Yeah. I think with most eating disorders, there's rarely ever just like one factor that is like, oh, this happened and then it started. For some people, that might be the case, but oftentimes it's, personality traits plus an external event, right? So for me, I am very aware of my personality traits. I am typically a perfectionist. I have high expectations, high achieving, or I like to be high achieving. That's something that um, makes me feel worthy, which I know is not how it should be, but that's how I've always been. So for me, that my personality traits to start was kind of the base, and then I definitely recognized for me there was an event. So I had moved away to university. Super stressful. Obviously, nursing school is not just a walk in the park. It was my first time away from home. I was in the city. I was super stressed. And then this is a great thing, and then I got engaged, which is, wonderful in itself. But um, I was 20. Social media had just become a thing. I'm aging myself now, but and all of a sudden the stress of school, my perfectionistic tendencies, and this pressure that I felt to look a certain way on my wedding day, just became too much for me. So I started, what started as I'm just going to try and lose a few pounds for my wedding then just completely took off. And at the time, I didn't really I was away from home. Like I said, I wasn't close with anybody at school. I didn't really have any accountability. My fiance at the time, we lived in different provinces. So we were doing long distance. So he only saw me every few months. So there was just a lot of freedom to just do whatever I wanted. And so it just kind of really took off from there. So it very quickly became very disordered to the point where one time Matt came home, my now husband, came home and was like, I don't even recognize you anymore. And that's kind of when I knew yeah, this is more than just a few pounds for my wedding. And then from there, I just couldn't stop. So it ended up lasting 5 or 6 years. It just became such a controlling factor in my life. I still had a few more years of school left to finish, newly married. I still had this expectation of myself that I wanted to be like this trophy wife, I guess. I wanted to look a certain way. And then, once it becomes a part of you, it's really hard to let go of. So that's the gist of sort of how it started, how my recovery journey went. I got to the point where it really was kind of a do or die situation, sadly. And a couple of things really helped in my own recovery. So I started working as a nurse and kind of recognized that if I'm going to be in charge of other people's lives, I need to be able to think clearly. There was a circumstance in nursing school, and thankfully it was in school when I wasn't responsible. We had just started orientation, that I had passed out in a bathroom. And that was a holy smokes, something has to change, because if I was on my own and if I was responsible for these people, who's to say what could happen? And that was really a moment in time where I remember thinking something has to change. Now, was I able to change right away after that? No, but it still stayed in my head of something, I have to work towards recovery. I have to get better. Something has to change. So that was a piece of it, of just knowing that if I wanted to be a nurse, I needed to get it together. Eating disorders are also extremely challenging on relationships. So to be newly married and to be battling an eating disorder, bless my husband, he is the most patient, loving man, because he stuck with me through it all. But it really was extremely challenging for us. We really missed out on the first 5 years of marriage, because I was so set on my ways and being in control of it. And so that too, he never gave me an ultimatum or anything, but my relationship with him is really important. And so part of my recovery too is I do want to have a healthy marriage. I do want to spend my life with this man. This is important to me. So that was another factor in just I want to get better. And then when I'm a Christian, I have really strong faith. And to me, I also just felt I'm wasting my life, and I have been given gifts that I'm supposed to share. And I've been given this beautiful life that I'm totally wasting. And so there was a lot of conviction there too, of just let's get it together and, enjoy the time that I have here. So there were a lot of factors that went into my recovery, and some of it I think ended up being, almost forced upon me in a really positive way. Someone that I know well asked me if I would write in our paper, the local paper, about my experience with an eating disorder and recovery. And it ended up being a weekly column that I wrote for years throughout my recovery. So then it became even though I'd never talked specifically to anyone, that became my accountability of I knew that people were reading this. And so I continued to work towards getting better. And I can say now that when I was writing about being recovered, I certainly was not recovered, but it was a really good part, or a really good process for me to even just talk about what that would look like. Yeah. So that was really funny, actually, now that I think about it. to write, and like I don't know who reads the paper anymore, especially in small town, but that became like a very cathartic experience for me.
Yeah, I can
And then
imagine.
yeah, the other big part of it, so ironically enough, I struggle really with anorexia and a severe exercise addiction. Ironically enough, my husband and I own a gym. We've owned the gym since we were married, essentially. So to try and recover from an exercise addiction and own a gym at the same time seems like it shouldn't work. But we own a CrossFit gym, and we're not really a typical CrossFit gym. We're very like low key, I guess. Very just focused on functional fitness. We're
Mhm.
not really competitive. And so being a part of the gym, coaching in the gym, and being an example to other women in the gym, and even just like I am sort of one of the main faces of the gym, I knew that I needed to represent the gym in a really healthy way. And so eventually over time, the image of like trying to be as skinny as possible, like nobody cared about that, and that wasn't important. And not that I should just care what other people think, but then it became like, okay, well, like how strong can I be? And like this, we're just here to be community. Nobody cares how good at this I am, and nobody cares about how I look. And so there was a really big, like, just healing factor for that, or for me, in that, of just knowing that people didn't care what I looked like. People didn't actually care how strong I was. It was just, we were there to be in community with each other. So, just like there's lots of factors that went into me developing an eating disorder, same with, recovering from an eating disorder. There was a lot of moving pieces and moving parts, but those are the main things that when I look back at my journey that always stand out to me. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a piece of my
It's
journey. Yeah.
it sounds like purpose really a big part of healing, right? There's like a
Absolutely.
few different things that you touched on there where it was like the purpose of like I want to be in a healthy relationship and I want to have a long-lasting marriage. Like that's a really strong purpose that really
Yep.
pulls somebody into healing, as well
Yep.
as like this purpose of like, yeah, I want to, provide this healthy image for other women in the gym. That's a really powerful kind of why to latch on to of like, hey, this is gonna be really tough and I got a journey ahead of me, but at least there's this thing that I'm chasing, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think like I wouldn't call it my specialty, but a lot of the majority of my clients are teen girls or younger women. And like that's where my heart is, because that's kind of the phase that I was in. That's when I started to really, become vulnerable to body image stuff and what people think. And I just think to be a little bit older now and to be an example to younger girls and to younger women just became really, really important to me. So now the way that I work out, the way that I eat, the way I portray myself, I am always thinking like, if younger me saw me, what would I think? Or, what are these younger girls seeing, and how can I help them, you know, be confident in who they are and not feel like they have this pressure to look like, you're what social media maybe portrays as beautiful. So, yeah, there's a lot of purpose in that. And for me to like, just looking back at it, I believe that I went through that for a reason so that I can be where I'm at now and help others. Um, so, yeah, purpose is huge for sure.
Yeah, and I always say like the struggle that I'm going through now is going to be an asset to like me being able to help other people because I'm the same
Hmm.
in my life. Anytime I'm going through something that's difficult, I'm always thinking about like how's this going to help other people? Like how am
Yeah.
I going to take this experience and help other people? And our struggles, that's really what it gives us. It's giving us the tools to be able to help other people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I want to go back to something you were talking about before, which in the early stages, like man, you had a lot of pressure on you,
Hmm.
right? It's
Hmm.
like going to school, like going off on your own for the first time, and then getting engaged, and like it's just like all this pressure. And I mean, I can just imagine what you must have been experiencing there, and just that level of like weight that you must have been feeling on your shoulders. How did the pressure contribute to the disordered eating or the disordered exercising? And I'm
Yeah.
also curious, and maybe if you can mix this in a little bit, but I don't like to ask two questions at once, but I'm also curious if you've always been an exercise enthusiast,
Mm.
and like through that time, were you also like, was that a way that you were helping relieve some of that pressure or trying to relieve some of that pressure?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, there was a lot of pressure. And I like it was only self-induced. I never have felt pressure externally from family or anyone else. It's just, I've always had this expectation of myself. And I think that a really common theme in eating disorders is, when you have this feeling or sense of control over what you're eating, how you're exercising, um, it feels like it's a relief of pressure, right? Oftentimes, having control over one thing makes us feel better. So for me, I think that was a big part of it too, is well, I can only do so much. Like I can study as hard as I can to control my grades. I can, only do so much to control other factors, but I can always control what I eat and how much I work out. A big part of that too is like living on my own, right? So eating disorders thrive on isolation. So when you're by yourself, it's very scary because there's no one there to be like, hey, this is too much. You need to
Mm.
stop. So yeah, for me, that was a really big piece of it. The exercise piece, I would always convince myself that I was doing it as a stress relief or as a healthy thing to, help with all the stresses of the world, all the pressures, all that stuff that it's supposed to be good for. But it absolutely became just another pressure, just another thing that I had to check off. And I had to burn a certain number of calories. I had to work out for a certain number of hours. It didn't matter how tired or how sore I was. I was like there at 5 o'clock every morning. And so it did not help with any of that stress or any of that pressure. It just only became another obligation that I had. Um, so I think that's really tricky just because exercise is something that should be a gift, a beautiful thing that everybody does because they want to live a healthy life, right? And yeah, it's always been a part of my life. I was a competitive soccer player before school. And so, yeah, I think that it just went from this wonderful thing that I can do as a way to like honor my body and be as healthy as I can be to this horrible obligation that weighed on me every day that I just had to do, or I would honestly have like a breakdown, a nervous breakdown if I didn't, burn a certain number of calories or do exactly what I had planned to do that day in the gym. And it was not a healthy relationship with exercise. So, yeah, I hope that answers both of your questions in one.
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
does. And exercise is one of those things. I've experienced it as well, where it can very easily become that added pressure because now
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at it like, yeah, I have all this stress, I have all this, you know, let's just call it mental health issues or mental health concerns, and exercise is my way to relieve that, right? Or it's
Mm-hmm.
like we know intuitively that if I'm exercising and I'm eating right, it's going to help with my stress, and like it
Yep.
is, a solution. But then it's like you almost become guilty and you attach shame to this idea of like, so if I'm not doing those things, then I'm not taking care of myself. And it
Mm-hmm.
just adds on to the pressure of like all this stress. Like, well,
Yeah,
now there's this other thing that I have to do in order to help myself. When really
totally.
it's like, probably if you look back, you're like, well, even actually just studying is probably reducing my stress because I'm gonna feel more
Oh,
prepared and stuff like
totally.
that.
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's tricky because, like, in theory, exercise is such a good and healthy thing.
Mhm.
And my recovery probably looked a lot different than I don't know, what we would normally prescribe for a person in recovery. I never quit working out throughout recovery. Um, and like that's really hard to to know, because it should be something that we all do on a regular basis. You should be able to do it for health, but where's the line? Like, where do you cross the line from health to disorder? And, oftentimes in addiction, you maybe aren't the most honest in how you're feeling about something, speaking from experience. So, to say like, no, I'm just doing this for health, or I'm just doing this because it feels good, or, it's good for my brain or my body or whatever, when in reality, I'm doing this to burn calories 100%.
Yeah.
So and nobody but you knows that. So it's a really, really tricky thing to navigate. And I can honestly say, and I think a big part of it too is like in CrossFit, there's no machines to tell you how many calories you burned unless you're like doing the rower or the bike or whatever. But generally it's for time, not for because you have to burn a certain number of calories. So the sport that I have obviously chosen, I have no idea. I purposely do not wear a smartwatch. So I have no idea how many calories I burned in a day. I don't know how many steps I've walked in a day. And those are purposeful things that I have set myself up for, because I know that there's no need for me to know that. My brain doesn't need to know those things. So if I'm going to work out, I go and I do a class. I do whatever that day is, and that's it. I don't think about how many calories I burned. I don't think about anything more. And for me, that has really helped in my recovery. Because when I had my exercise addiction, it was always like, get me on a machine where it tells me how many calories I burned, or I'm going to run so that my watch tells me all these things. So I think that technology also can be really harmful in how we work out and why we work out. And just kind of taking those things away and taking a step back and looking at, okay, why are you choosing to do this? Is really important in that journey as well. And I mean, there are, of course, circumstances where exercise has to be taken away for a certain amount of time. Like that's just the way that it is, depending on a person's acuity or a person's health. But I think that if it's possible to transform it into a healthy thing again, that's really important for me in my coaching. And that definitely differs from some other, I guess, views in the coaching space for eating disorders. I think that I'm a little bit unique in that way. But a lot of that just comes from my experience. If someone had told me, if I had felt ready to recover and someone told me, okay, no more working out, I would have been like, never mind. That's too scary. I'm not doing this. So
Too
for
big of
me,
an
it
adjustment.
can actually still, with a lot of accountability and in a certain way, it can still be a part of a person's recovery, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is just finding the joy in it again, right? It's like getting
Exactly.
back to
Yeah.
that thing of like, what is it actually serving? Like, how is this actually serving me? What is it actually giving me? I think that's so important too. Another thing that kind of caught my ear as you were talking is your then fiance, now husband, coming home and being like, I hardly can recognize you right now.
Mm-hmm.
Was that physically, like emotionally and mentally? I imagine maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah. Um, I think for him, most shockingly, it was physically. Had I did not look like myself anymore. It got to the point where like it got pretty extreme, and like none of my clothes fit. I didn't like I am not built as just a teeny tiny person. I am naturally muscular. I am naturally curvy. And he came home, one after a few months of being away and just being like, you don't even look like you anymore. And then to like, we would only get to see each other for a couple days at a time when he would come home. And in those days, like, regardless if he was there or not, I would maintain my routine, which was multiple hours of working out or running. And I would still like, we couldn't go on dates because I would refuse to eat at restaurants. And so it was like completely taking over even fun parts of our relationship. And he's like, this isn't you though. Like, why can't we do these things? Or why are you going running when we only have a few hours together, kind of thing. So he's very gracious and he was so patient, but that was a thing where it's like, oh, this is not okay anymore. Like, this isn't just about exercising for your health. This is so much more. And so I think that was pretty scary for him, and a big eye opener for me too, of like, in theory, I should want to spend every minute with you, and I shouldn't be thinking about going for a run so I can burn calories. I shouldn't be not wanting to go on a date with my fiance or my husband or whatever, but that's what the eating disorder voices tell you. It's like, you can't do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
you mentioned like you struggle with like anorexia. And I think a lot of people when they hear that, they think it's like solely related to food, but it's not. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but anorexia is really just like this drive to look thinner, right? It's this something inside of you that's just you just want to continue to drive to like have that smaller physique and to whether that's through not eating or exercising more or both, it sounds like in your case.
Yeah.
Um, am I correct, first of all, in that assessment?
Yeah, so anorexia, I mean the DSM-5 or whatever it is now, there is a definition, and I think it does include a person being a certain body weight
Mm,
in comparison to what their baseline is. So yeah, it is physically based. But yes, I think anorexia is focused on restriction. And so restriction in order to have a certain outcome, obviously of, yeah, generally a thinner body. So yeah, that was the ultimate goal. And oftentimes it feels like there is no end to it. There's not an end of like, if I weigh this much or if I look this way, that's the end. Right? We tell ourselves that. We think that it's going to be better then. We'll be happy at that point. But the thoughts and the behaviors have become so ingrained that oftentimes we get to that point and then it's like, okay, maybe a little bit more, or I want to stop now, but I can't. So that's when it can get pretty, yeah, pretty scary then.
yeah, and we see it even in like bodybuilders too, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
you think you're big enough, you hit that goal and you're like, but what if I could just be a little bit
Yeah,
bigger, right?
totally.
And
Well, and
it's
yeah, I think that like in any, looks based sport, there's
mhm,
always going to be a little bit of disorder in most people. Like maybe that's an overstatement, but you get to a point where it's like, is this really healthy anymore? Or like, what are we doing here?
yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
it's what puts people like you and I'll put myself in that category too. You know, those A-type people who are just really driven and like
Mhm.
really want to succeed and set big expectations for themselves. That's one of the risks. Like it puts somebody like you way more at risk because you're so driven and because you have such high expectations and um that's what the research shows that we're more at risk for that type of behavior because of it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, which is like, it's unfortunate because I think being driven and having high expectations is not a bad thing. That's how wonderful
yeah,
things are created. That's how, you know, things are invented. That's how great things happen. It's just how we use that, and how I think a big part of that is like how we're encouraged, right? Like if, like for me, I as soon as I started losing weight, people commented, "Oh, you look so good." Like,
yeah,
wow, I wish I could do that. Right. And so then it's like, oh, like I'm getting all this great attention. People don't know that I haven't eaten today, but they don't need to know that. They just think I look good. So I'm just going to keep
yeah.
doing this. Right.
Must be
So
working. Yeah,
yeah, I think it's how we're encouraged in our giftings or in our passions, and how we use our desires to, be excellent at something. I think that plays such a big part in it too. And having balance and having those people in your life too to say like, hey, it's okay to rest, or hey, you can slow down, or hey, your worth actually isn't tied to what you accomplish. That's just like a bonus, but your worth comes from who you are, not what you do. And I think that is a good reminder for people who have that perfectionistic tendency or have those high expectations of themselves too.
and it sounds like you're very fortunate to have somebody in your life that was able to help you recognize that as well, and give you that support and help you through that balance a little bit as well, but also to help open your eyes to it. And I'm curious if like how much of that was external of like having somebody who was like, hey, this isn't right, or
Mm.
whether it was more eye-opening for you, almost in a sense like what came to my mind when you were talking was um that maybe there would be I could picture myself in that situation, and somebody comes home and they're like, I don't even recognize you anymore. And that feels like a negative, whereas like what I was doing, I thought was a
Mm,
positive for myself.
yeah.
I could imagine that being an eye-opening experience for you as well, to say, wow, I thought I was doing this like this thing that was going to make me look better or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And now this person who, is attracted to me is saying like they don't
Mm-hmm.
even recognize me anymore. I'm
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, there's so much that I could say about just eating disorders in terms of like how it affects a marriage relationship. And I'm sure other relationships too, but this is just my own experience. Um, yeah. Uh, so before I get into that, I'll say another big part of why I am passionate about coaching is so that marriage partners don't have to be that person for one another, because it's
Hmm.
extremely damaging. So, although my husband is, I will say it, the most amazing man and so patient, and I'm so thankful for him, and I do credit most of my recovery to him. Um, that should never have been his job. He became my caretaker. He became my like accountability person, which means also the person that I resented most of the time. And that is extremely hard to just recover from as in being married. So, a big
Mm.
part of why I love coaching is so that spouses don't have to do that, parents don't have to do that, because that's not your role. They should be there to love and support a person, not tell them, like, hey, you can't go to the gym. Hey, you have to eat. Hey, this is unhealthy. Hey, all those things that shouldn't be their job. So yeah, what was the other part of your question?
That's good. I was genuinely curious just on when that you had that experience with your fiance coming home and being like, "Yeah, I don't even recognize you anymore." I'm curious if that was
Yeah.
eye-opening for you in a sense of like, oh, like maybe what I'm doing isn't giving this the perception, the result that I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So it's so messy because although he fell in love with me in my healthiest self, right? Where, I'm, like I said, curvy, I've got muscle. He always comments on like the biggest thing he missed was like my chubby cheeks. Not that they're chubby, but I have nice full cheeks, right? So he's like, when you were sick, your cheeks were gone, and so you didn't look like you. And that was something he always commented on. And so for him, when he would say like, you don't look like yourself, and like, I still love you, but like this isn't you, a part of me was like, oh, that's kind of scary. But the other part of me is like, ooh, what I'm doing is working. Like
Mm,
it becomes like this, it's so messed up. It's like, even though it's this really negative thing that someone is saying to you, it becomes like, wow, they noticed, like, this is good. I'm gonna keep going. Um, Even though I knew that like that was such an unhealthy thought to have, that was the thought that I always had. So it's kind of, those are the points where you realize like, oh, this is scary that I'm even thinking this way, but you can't stop it. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how that felt. And for him, he was just saying like, hey, you don't have to change. You don't have to do this. Like, you don't have to be someone that you're not in order for me to love you. Or I don't care that I don't want you to be skinny, or I love you the way you are. That's what he meant to say, or that's what he was trying to say. Whereas to me, it comes off as like, what I'm doing is working and I'm going to keep doing it. So yeah, it's pretty wild how a disordered mind just twists things that people say.
yeah, and like you said, it is a frustrating thing on a relationship because one person thinks that they're trying, like they think that they're helping, they think that they're telling you what you need to hear, but that disordered mind is it's just not hearing it the same, right? And
Yep.
it finds ways to justify the current addictive
Yep.
action, right?
And I think that's that is one of the biggest benefits of having a coach who's been through it, is we know that there's that voice inside that even though what you think you're saying is helpful or healthy, the way that a person takes it is probably going to be the opposite. So going through it, having the experience with that is so unique to people who have only been through it. So like there's, amazing psychologists or amazing doctors out there who are really good to a point, but if you haven't been through it, it's really hard to understand the whole picture, the whole story, right? So I think in like even just in my own clients, like they've said, like, you're the only person that understands. I'm like, well, I know, because I'm the only person that's also been through it. So, and that's why I do it, right? It's like I can also call out like their bull crap. Like they can try and manipulate situations or tell people a certain thing, but I know exactly what they're really thinking. And I can say, like, I'm betting that this is actually what you're thinking right now. Am I right? And they're like, yeah, I can't hide anything from you. I'm like, well, it's not that you're like, no, you can't, because I've been there and I know how that feels. And I know you're just trying to protect this thing that has turned into something that feels so important to you. So yeah, I think a big part of why it's really valuable to have a coach in this situation is because likely we're the only one in that person's circle that really understand the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and kudos to you for being a coach that is sharing their story, because how many coaches out there have struggled with these things, but
Mhm.
maybe they're not comfortable sharing that, and that's fine. But it's a super valuable thing for other people who are struggling to be able to relate to a coach in that way too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think, like you said, it's like coaching in any sport or anything else. You probably wouldn't hire I guess in our circumstance, you wouldn't hire a CrossFit coach who's never done CrossFit before. Like
No.
that doesn't feel right. So it just fits. It just makes sense to have someone in your corner who's been through the same thing that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So as you look back again, like going back to, you've had time to sit back and reflect on this a lot. When you look back to those beginning stages, this might be helpful for people who maybe are going through this or maybe are listening to this and thinking, geez, maybe I do have some level of disordered mindset and disordered eating or exercise.
Mhm.
Can you recall, like, are there things that you feel you could have done earlier on that would have helped pull you out sooner?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think that I mean, I don't know about my willingness at the time to do them, but a huge part of I think why it got to where it got to is just how isolated I was. So if you're someone who, starts to notice these things, it's so important to tell someone or to talk about it or just to surround yourself with healthy people. Because if you're left to your own devices, often that voice that tells you to keep going becomes louder than anything else. Um, I also, this is not my proudest moment, but I never asked for help. So my whole 5, 6, 7, 8 years that I struggled, I never got help. And I thought, if I got help, that was being weak or giving up. When in reality, like it would have helped so much, and it would have probably saved a lot of heartache that we went through and a lot of hard things that I did go through. But I think that like I didn't know anything existed, and I shouldn't say that. We did go to counseling once and it was the worst experience of our lives. So then I was completely turned off of, trying to get help. And at the time, like I went to doctors and they're like, well, your BMI is normal, so you're healthy. So it really just like fueled my fire of like,
Mm.
well, I will just continue on then. And, like Matt encouraged me always to get help, or he just wanted someone to tell me like, hey, this is not okay. And every time, like if I went to a doctor or whatever, they're like, well, you look healthy. So, or, your BMI is fine. So must be okay. Like they really did not understand what was going on. So I think, yeah, in those early times, I would just encourage people, if you start to notice disordered thoughts or just feeling really scared about how things are going, like reach out before it becomes, years. The earlier you deal with these things, I think the easier it becomes to get out of them too. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's such a big thing, is just surrounding yourself with that. And then also, uh, it's one thing to recognize your behaviors. It's another thing, like you said, to be willing
Hmm.
to own up to it in a sense, I guess, but
Hmm.
also to it sounded to me a little bit like getting help would have been like admitting that like
Yeah,
this is wrong, whereas your brain's trying to
totally.
convince you that it's right.
Mhm.
And credit to you again, your social media, your website, you do a really great job of really like normalizing some of these things and kind of bringing like a realism to it. So to make sure that we get it in, where can people follow you and your website?
Yeah. My Instagram is Jilisa Wrote. So it's Jilisa and then just the word wrote. And then my coaching is nourishedandfreecoaching.com. Yeah, that's where people can find me. Yeah, social media is the easiest always, unfortunately. It's such a good thing and such a bad thing, but
Well,
that's
I
where
mean,
everybody is. So
I've heard it as like social media. Uh, I agree. I have a love-hate relationship with social
yeah,
media, being a business
totally.
owner as well. But
Yes.
there is an expression that social media just it's not bad. It just exposes things a
Hmm.
lot,
Yeah,
right? And it's like
definitely.
it's how you use it is,
Yeah. Well, I
and you're
think you
using it
have
in a
to,
very positive way. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think you have to be a very strong person to like use it in a always in a healthy way because it's so easy to become addicted to it or go down the rabbit holes or whatever. So I always tell Matt, like, man, if we could do business without social media, I would love that.
I know I say the same thing all the time.
Yeah,
I
but
would love to just delete my social medias off my phone and stuff. It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
really possible right now, but
no, yeah. Someone can tell me how to run a business without social media. I will pay you all my money.
yes, I agree. I agree. If you find that person,
Yeah,
please let me know.
yeah, yeah, I will.
Before we wrap up, there's so much that we could still get into on this episode. So we'll have to do it again sometime down the
Sure.
line.
Yeah.
But is there anything that you didn't get a chance to say that is really important to you?
Mm. Um, I think I just always want to encourage people and tell people that freedom and recovery is possible. Doesn't matter who you are or what you've been through, it's always possible. And I fully believe that everybody deserves to live a life of freedom. And that's kind of that's what I base my coaching on. I just want everyone, I think just being where I'm at now, um, ha having come from a place where like I was willing to lose my life and I almost did to now like living a life so full of joy and adventure and now getting to be a mom and just actually feeling like I'm living out my passion is such a gift and I want everybody to experience that. So that would be my closing statement.
Oh, it's beautiful. And thank you so much for coming on and
Yeah, thanks for
just
having me.
really opening yourself up and sharing your story. I just know it's going to be helpful for so many people to hear that. And if there are people who this resonated with, and or if there's, more questions that you have, then please reach out to
Mhm.
Jaleesa and let's get you guys connected. And yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.